All right, grade nines. So, welcome to our session for today, and we are doing, as we can see, the respiratory system. Okay, so of course, here with the respiratory system, we are going to look at a couple things, which is the one of the first things we look at. We looking at any system is looking at the components. We'll be looking at the processes as well that take place in the system, and of course we will have a look at the health issues. Okay, the issues or the attacks, diseases or sicknesses that attack this part of our body. Remember, because the system is a part of our body system and it works together with other systems, and we already covered the digestive system as well as the circulatory system, and now we're on the respiratory system. Okay, so shall we progress to the next slide? Okay, so that was just a mind map for the introduction. Okay, now one thing we must of course understand, okay, when it comes to the respiratory system, is that, remember, there was a list of 6 processes, okay, and respiratory processes was one of the 6 processes. Okay, remember, one of the 6 processes of all living organisms is respiration. Okay, the ability to breathe. All right, the ability to breathe, take in oxygen, of course, and release carbon dioxide. Unless, of course, you are a plant where you take in carbon dioxide and you release oxygen. So I definitely think this is worth stating, that if all the trees and all the plants and all those things are eliminated from our world, then definitely our oxygen supply is going to decrease quite significantly, in which case most of the human race will slowly start to die out. Okay, so all these people that advocate for Greenpeace, or they advocate for no more cutting down of the trees in Amazon and forest and whatever, all those things, of course, they are right, you know, and I fully stand with them, and so should we, because if there's no oxygen, all living organisms that require oxygen, so us as human beings, mammals, animals, etc., will all start to perish or die out slowly. Maybe not very fast, but quite slowly. We're at a steady rate, because there's only so much oxygen that can supply so many people, so many living organisms. Anyway, I digress. Okay, now what happens for respiration is that all cells of the body need oxygen. Okay, so this is worth stating again. Okay, all cells in the body, okay, they need oxygen. Right, they need oxygen. Okay, why do they need oxygen? Now, we may have covered this in one of the other systems of past. Okay, well, one of the reasons why they need oxygen is, of course, energy. Okay, if you're an athlete and you train, they always talk to you about your breathing, because if you breathe, of course, you take in oxygen and you supply energy to your cells that are in your body. Okay, they need to get their energy, okay, from the nutrients, and then, of course, they produce. The body needs oxygen, so it can produce CO2 as a waste product. Right? If it's a waste product, it means it must exit the body. Okay, so that's obviously what I think we went through when we touched on the body system. When we introduced this topic, I think it was maybe a couple of weeks ago, looking at the athlete or body systems.
Sorry, JP, could I ask a favor, please?
Cool. As waste product. Okay, great, fantastic. The respiratory system, of course. Where do we get oxygen from? Okay, well, we get oxygen, of course, from the air that exists all around us. Okay, because oxygen is part of the air, right? Or it's part of air, it's in the air. Okay, air consists of a number of different elements, of course. Okay, sometimes the air is not always clean, unfortunately. Okay, but we get oxygen from the air and then release carbon dioxide back into the air as well. And of course, later on, when we get to another further unit down the line, down to here, of course, because we're still in the first term, we'll learn about the respiratory system in more detail. But we're just going to introduce some of the main points here. Right, so we've introduced the respiratory system, okay, of course. And now we just want to run through some of the processes, okay. Now, there are three main processes, okay, that happen. Okay, so I'm not going to draw the respiratory system now because I don't think I'm going to do a good job of what's going to happen, okay. But I will explain the processes and then I'll attempt to draw it. Maybe I'll be first to explain the process, okay. The first process, of course, is air. Okay, now a couple things happen here. Okay, breathing moves gases between the air and the gas exchange surface of our body. Okay, that's why breathing is so important. Okay, so let's maybe state that quickly in a summarized form. Breathing moves gases. Okay, because oxygen's a gas and air is filled with gas, of course. So breathing moves gases between the that's the word I'm looking for. Moves it between the air and the gas exchange surface. Okay, so basically gases do a bit of an exchange. Okay, fantastic. That's the first process. Okay, we add surface in there actually. Okay, and this usually occurs around the mouth and nose. Okay, because we can breathe in through our nose and through our mouth. Okay. All right, and then of course there is a gaseous exchange. Okay, so that gaseous exchange, we forgot how to spell gaseous now. That gaseous exchange now moves, all right, it moves gases between the tissues. Okay, so what gaseous exchange are we talking about? Remember, there's an exchange that happens when we breathe in oxygen and we release carbon dioxide. There's a gas exchange there. Okay, something's entering and something is leaving. Okay, so gaseous exchange moves gases between the tissues and also the air in the lungs. And then last but not least, okay, also in the tissues, okay, respiration. Okay, respiration releases energy. Okay, remember when our cells in our body, in our muscles, right, they take energy. Okay, it all happens in the cells. Happens in all cells. Okay, an example of that, of course, would happen in our muscle cells. Okay, when we use our muscles for strenuous training or when our muscles are under more stress. So I pretty much have a very rough and horrible drawing, but I suppose the anatomy is the anatomy, so skeleton frame nonetheless. Of course, you can always Google a better picture. So this is just a graphical representation. Of course, we breathe in through our nose, like I just did now. We breathe air. And we breathe out through our mouth, so that is where that's the gas exchange surface, of course, because that's where the gases do their little bit of exchange as well, entering and exit there. Then, of course, the air goes into our lungs, and from our lungs, obviously, a further gaseous exchange, or the gaseous exchange moves down there and moves in between the tissues, and the air in the lungs as well, so it goes to our lungs, and then from the lungs, of course, there's a respiration release, and that little green area there shows the air or the oxygen in the air going straight to our muscles to be used, of course, as or stored as energy of some sort. Okay, so this is just a graphical representation. Okay, I'm sure you students will be able to draw a better picture or better, more suitable description. So what we have here, grade 9s, is a tabulated processes and description. My descriptions are very much summarized, but I'm going to talk through them. Alright, the first process, of course, that we saw in our little graphical representation was breathing. Okay, one of my favorite scenes from Karate Kid is when Daniel-san is all stressed and flustered and he don't know what to do. He just doesn't know what to do. He's stressed. You know, people stress, they talk very fast and then they just like get angry and all over the show and stuff. And of course his teacher, the great sensei, Mr. Miyagi, tells him, when you feel life's out of focus, you return to basic life, which is breathing. Alright, so if you don't breathe, you have no life, because if you stop breathing, you die. So breathing is, of course, the most important and the first process. Okay, now how we breathe, alright, there's a couple of things that goes into breathing, and two other components of our body, which are ribs and the diaphragm. Okay, when you breathe in and out, you can feel your diaphragm opening, expanding, and contracting, as well as your ribs, moving up and down. Okay, so what they are tasked with in our body, they are used to draw air into the lungs, and that's when we inhale. Okay, that word is inhale. Okay, in and hail, H-A-L-E. Okay, inhale or inhalation, but let's just stick with inhale. And then to push air out again from the lungs, which is to exhale, of course. X, E-X, okay, not just the letter X, but E-X, and hail. Okay, so that's all that goes into breathing. Right, that's all that goes into breathing, or not all that goes into breathing, but the first process. Then, of course, once the breathing has taken place, at the same time, there's a gaseous exchange, okay, which happens by diffusion on the inner surface of the lung or our lungs. Oxygen from the oxygen-rich air, of course, that is breathed in would be swapped for carbon dioxide. Okay, so obviously the lungs and our body swaps out carbon dioxide for oxygen, okay, to trade places. And then, of course, there is respiration, okay, which is the third process and the title of the system that we are studying right now, which is the respiration system or respiratory system, is that all cells of the body, they use up the oxygen that they take, right, from the blood in the chemical process, okay, that releases the energy. Okay, carbon dioxide is obviously a waste product, and that gets removed when we exhale. Okay, but all our cells would obviously take the oxygen from our body liquid, right, the red body liquid, okay, and we'll take all the oxygen from there, and then obviously keep the oxygen, or use that oxygen in turn to release energy in our body. Of course, this process is quite monitored and studied when it comes to exercise, but technically we do some form of exercise every day. If it's just walking up and down, if it's maybe walking from the field back to class, if you're at school, walking to the kitchen, walking all the time, we still require a certain level of energy for that. We don't think about it that way, but of course that oxygen that we take in still gets converted or used as energy. All right. Right, moving on to the next topic in this system is components, of course. We've looked at the processes. So components, of course, just to mention again, oxygen and carbon dioxide, they can't pass through our skin. All right, our normal skin. Okay, there are some living organisms that can take in oxygen through their skin or through their body. All right. Instead, we have special organs that's called lungs. Okay. Now, the lungs are very thin. They are moist. Okay, and they allow gas to pass through them. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that drawing that we had, and we're just going to follow the path of all those air arrows showing, and we're just going to go through the different components, of course. And the first components would be the nose and mouth. Okay, the nose and mouth, okay, are they're very important body parts because they take in the air, all right, for our lungs. Okay, so of course air enters the body here. It would be absolutely awesome if our skin cells or skin pores could absorb oxygen. It would be extremely effective. Okay, we'd be super beings almost. Okay, air can enter the body through the nose and mouth. Okay, then what happens? It then joins I always have trouble saying this word, but I think I'm going to do my best to pronounce it. The trachea. Alright? The trachea is not trachea, it's trachea. Okay? Another more easy to pronounce word is windpipe. Okay? Windpipe. Okay? Which is at the back of our throat. Okay? That's when it enters through the mouth, of course. When it joins, then of course there is the nasal cavity. Now nasal, of course, we can guess where that word is derived from. The nasal cavity, which is of course in the nose. Alright, this is lined with hairs. Okay? With little hairs. Right, it's lined with little hairs and is kept moist. All right, the little hairs at the nasal cavity in the nose, the hairs there is kept moist and clean and warm the air. All right. So what do? They of course they keep the air nice and clean. All right, moist and warm. That's what they do to the air, of course. At the same time, the nose can smell substances in the air, of course. Okay? We smell with our nose, we don't smell with our mouth, or mouths, unfortunately. Okay. So that's the nose and mouth. Moving on to the trachea, the trachea. I just disobeyed my own rule. The trachea and other passageways. So what happens here? The trachea is also lined with moist hairs to trap anything that gets past the nasal cavity, or that also comes in through the mouth. Okay? The trachea, of course, is kept open. Okay, let's write that down. Okay, trachea is kept open. Okay, it's it's kept open by springy pieces of cartilage. Springy pieces of cartilage. How do I spell cartilage? So the A, always going to spell it with the E. Okay, and it's shaped like a letter C. Okay. Of course, moving down now to the chest. Okay. One of my favorite body parts. Okay. In the chest, it divides. Alright, as we saw, it's split. Alright, divides into two branches. Okay. And it's called a bronchi. Okay, it's called a bronchi, of course, and one for each lung. So, for the lungs. All right, fantastic. Then, of course, there's still another passageway inside the lung. All right, and they then divide in the lung So what's the same in the one lung will be for the other lung. So they divide in the lung into tiny branches. Okay, we can see that in most human anatomy drawings is that there's lots of little branches there. Okay, so the purpose for the tiny branches, okay, they spread through the whole lung, so that every part can obviously get fresh air. Okay, so there's not just one pipe or one pathway, but multiple tiny branches or multiple tiny pathways to ensure that the entire lung gets access to the fresh air, of course. Sweet. Now that we are inside the lungs, boys and girls, okay, they are well supplied with the red liquidy substance that I like to refer to as blood. Okay, so the lungs are very well supplied, all right, with blood, so that obviously the gaseous exchange can happen. Remember, blood is the carrier in our bodies, all right? It's the liquid that carries. It's almost like a free train that runs through our bodies, and everything hops on and just enjoys the ride. Okay? So, it's very well supplied. So I have to add that as the first point. Okay? Right? It's well supplied with blood. Okay. Now the gaseous exchange, okay, which is very important to denote here, is that it happens very quickly. Okay, there's almost like no time to watch it happen, almost unless you must actually slow it down. Okay, so it happens, of course, very quickly because we don't think to take our next breath. Okay, happens very quickly. Okay, the reason why it happens very quickly, okay, is because the lungs, all right, they have a very thin skin, right? Very thin skin that's also very moist, of course. That's with sufficient blood to bring and carry away the gases. Okay, moist with sufficient, in other words, well, there's a lot of blood there, of course. All right, and the blood, of course, carries away the gases. Okay, the special skin inside the body, all right, this special skin, well, it's inside the body, of course. We normally find skin on the outer layer, the outside of the body, that's actually protecting or covering our bodies. All right, this special skin is inside the body, so it can be protected and obviously kept moist. Okay, if you touch your skin now that's on the outside of your body, you'll find that it's dry. Okay, it's not wet, it's not moist. Okay, so that's why it's kept on the inside of the body, where it's kept nice and moist with sufficient, of course, with sufficient blood, so that they can carry away the gases, namely carbon dioxide out. Okay, but mainly for oxygen to the rest of our cells in our bodies. Okay. All right, and of course, one of the last components, of course, is obviously the role the blood plays. Okay. All right, this is quite intuitive, which I've mentioned over and over before, but it's very good putting down again. Okay, that oxygen is obviously carried. Okay, like I said, blood is a carrier from the lungs, all right, to the cells in the blood cells. So our blood cells is one of the first cells that actually get this oxygen. Okay, the oxygen from the oxygen-rich air. All right, and then of course we know that CO2, which is carbon dioxide, okay, is carried away. Carried by the blood cells or by the cells, okay, back to the lungs. Okay, so it's carried back to the lungs, and what do the lungs do? Okay, with the ribs and the diaphragm, obviously pushes that air out our body. Okay. All right, to end off with a bit of negativity, health issues, okay, that eludes this respiratory system. Okay, there are many, of course, as we see you have 4 there, okay. The reason why there are many diseases or sicknesses or illnesses of the respiratory system, all right, because it has to be in contact with the outside air, and yet is so thin, warm, and moist, okay. The first health issue, okay, is asthma, all right, which is a disease in which your breathing tubes become more sensitive. Okay, they become more sensitive to substances or some substances in the air. Okay, now we've all heard of someone say, I'm having an asthma attack, or we've heard of an asthma attack, maybe seen someone have an asthma attack. It's very scary. During an asthma attack, the breathing tubes become narrow, right? So they become very, very narrow, allowing not a lot of air to pass through. Okay, which makes it obviously difficult to breathe enough air in and out. Okay, it's very serious and needs, of course, fast or quick treatment. Right, you need to act very fast in an asthma attack. All right, otherwise the person, of course, can pass away, unfortunately. And of course, the best way to treat it would have to be administering the asthma pump to the asthma patients, of course. That pump would obviously set them right, so the breathing tubes can relax and open up again. The second one there being lung cancer. Okay, now lung cancer is often caused by smoking of cigarettes, okay, or smoking of any type of substance. I mean, smoking is smoking. It doesn't matter if it is what we call here in South Africa. They don't call it this anywhere other parts of the world. Orca pipe, right? Or even vaping for that matter, because when you vape water vapor. Or cigarettes, of course, which is like the main driver behind lung cancer. All right, but smoking back in about the 1950s, 1960s, around there, smoking was acceptable. Right, it was acceptable as an actual recreational activity, until, of course, it was discovered that, hey, this thing that we do is killing us. You know, often the smoking you were thought of to be quite cool if you smoked, if you stood with the ciggy. Obviously, girls liked guys who smoked because they looked very cool with a cigarette and whatever back those days. But no, it's not cool when they found out that, hey, you can actually die. Okay, in the film called The Snows of Kilimanjaro, okay, obviously smoking was glamorized in that film, all right, but of course they didn't know what the effects or the dangerous effects smoking had. Okay, but because we know now, we're a bit more wiser, we now know that smoking leads to many different diseases, but one of the top diseases it leads to is lung cancer, unfortunately. Okay, even today, I would say about 1 in 5 deaths are due to smoking. All right, and sometimes it gets you early, and sometimes it gets you later in life, in your old age. Cigarette smoke. Okay, this is why cigarette smoke contains many chemicals that are obviously sucked down into the lungs when you breathe or inhale. Okay, they get into the rest of your body from the lungs, and then you become addicted to a substance called tobacco. Okay, and there's many different substances in cigarettes, of course, that are extremely harmful to your lungs and to your body. I don't know about you, but I want to be able to breathe properly, so smoking is definitely like no for me. So that's lung cancer. The third one on our list is bronchitis. Okay, now bronchitis, of course, that is due or caused mainly by people living in areas with air pollution. Okay, and the reason why it's caused, or why air pollution has a big deal with bronchitis, okay, people that live in areas with high volumes of air pollution, right, they show that they are the chance of getting a disease in the respiratory system is greater than that of people that don't. Okay, this is because polluting the air with polluting particles, they damage the protective lining of the breathing tubes. Okay, allowing what is known as microbes in, which is harmful substances that we can't see. Okay, if the infection is in our breathing passages or in the airways, such as the trachea, all right, and any of those other air passageways, then we call it bronchitis. Okay. It is especially important that children whose lungs are still developing, that are kept away from smoke pollution, all right, such as from internal fires in small buildings without proper ventilation, because otherwise then they will always have respiratory diseases growing up, and ailments such as bronchitis. They'll get it as if it's second nature. And I also know that a couple of smokers get bronchitis quite often as well. You'll just find that so-and-so is not in work today. Why? They've got bronchitis. I've never personally had bronchitis before. I've just had a sore throat, but I would imagine that I would probably freak out if I had to have bronchitis. And then the last one, which is probably one we've never heard of before, is asbestosis. All right. This is a material that resists fire. Is called asbestos. All right. Asbestos or asbestos. It's a material that resists fire. This was commonly used in buildings as fire protection, but however, it contains many tiny straight fibers that can be breathed in. These fibers, of course, they puncture the lung tissue. Remember, the lung has a very thin skin and moist skin around it. Okay, so it's not very well protected, really, from damage or substances that can damage it. But they puncture the lung. The lung forms lumps around the fibers, which makes the lungs less elastic, so they harden. All right, and that will obviously cause shortness of breath. The lumps can also lead to lung cancer. All right, in South Africa, this was a source of asbestos with mines in the Northern Cape and the Northern Province, and of course those mines are now closed. Okay, but the workers who were involved with this material, such as asbestos, all right, when it was being used, they could and possibly have currently, if any of those workers are still alive today, have damage to their lungs. So the respiratory system is not a system that we want to necessarily play with when it comes to disease, right? We want to make sure we look after it, okay? Asthma and bronchitis are one of the two common ones that obviously can be treated with medication. Okay, asthma pump. Bronchitis, you take medication that the doctor prescribes you. But of course, lung cancer, that's a bit of a slow death. All right, it's a long-term sickness. People usually live with it for a while, and that's a very slow death and not a nice time to be alive if you have lung cancer. As well as asbestosis, which forms a lump in our lungs eventually after breathing in some of those very tiny fibers, because they puncture the lung tissue. And if you have asbestosis caused from asbestos or asbestos, however you want to pronounce it, with that lump inside our lung, we can also go back to the second one and get lung cancer. So this system is very, very vulnerable to quite a bit of diseases and sicknesses, but it's our job, of course, to look after our body and its systems, okay? Our digestive system as well, our circulatory system as well as now our respiratory system. It's important that we look after it, okay? We now have a better understanding of how it works and the gaseous exchange that occurs at which part of our body. Now we know how to better take care of it. So that's also another reason why we are learning about the respiratory system, so we can better look after it and better take care of it. And that concludes my lesson for this session, grade 9. Thank you so much for joining me on the respiratory system. Stay tuned for our next video. We'll have a look at the next system found in our body systems.